reality is we're learning as we go along. One thing we're sure in is we believe in young people, and in doing that we think we can deliver on part at least of the necessary ecosystem and context for a sustainable future, and that is, let's ensure that we engage in the truly richest resource that we have, which is our young people, because that is ultimately how we're all going to succeed. And the reason why we do it is because it makes business sense. Our employees are more engaged as a result. We were just recently voted the 8th best company to work for in the UK, and we have the highest level of customer satisfaction across our sector and have done for the last 5 years. So there must be something in what we're doing that's also supporting our business. So with that, let me hand back to Jim. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Ronan. So we now move into our slightly sort of entertainment-based, but also quite insightful part of the evening, where we play the good or bad game. And for anyone who was here in January, Ian Cheshire played this with us. So basically, I'm going to read out a number of things that Ronan has to tell us whether they are good or bad, and he can qualify them a little bit if he needs to. So the first one is, the social purpose of business is to make profit.
Definitely good.
The Occupy movement.
Also good. Gets people engaged in what's important.
The social contribution of X Factor.
Good-ish. But again, I think anything that engages people and talks about values and achievement or whatever, it's got to be a good thing.
24% of UK wealth being in the hands of the wealthiest 1%.
It's bad, and it echoes exactly the sentiment of something like Think Big. At the end of the day, we have to make sure that we broaden the base of creativity and value creation in our economy.
The belief that consumption makes you happy.
I think consumption is fundamentally a good thing. It has to be sustainable, clearly, but again, you know, the principle of consumption is not something we should shy away from.
Allowing employees to use Facebook at work.
Absolutely a good thing. I'm allowed to tweet while I'm at the office, so why shouldn't they be on Facebook?
Okay. Major retailers taking market share from local retailers.
I think that's bad, but bad for a reason is that we haven't harnessed localism. You know, one of the things about the mobility sector is it's all about personal, local, mobile, and businesses like ours have to do a much better job to make sure that the average cafe owner on a local village high street can compete with the big multiples.
The rise of internet-based telephony providing free phone calls.
See, again, I think that's a good thing. In fact, we liked it so much we went out and bought one. And we've just launched an over-the-top product globally called To Me. Fundamentally, the point there for me is, if you aren't delivering to your customers what they truly value, well, then you're going to go out of business. You need to get smart.
The growth of online betting.
I think gambling, you know, among consenting adults is not something we should be unduly concerned about. And I think, you know, all of the development of stuff on gamification online is probably a positive way that we change behaviours generally.
The growing power of China.
Actually, we just sold a 4.5% stake in China Unicom this morning, but we kept a 5% stake. So I think, on balance, a good thing, a huge new market for many of us, and real opportunity.
Barack Obama winning the US election?
Yes, we can. So, got to be good.
Cutting benefits to the unemployed to discourage welfare dependence.
I think that's actually a good thing. Let's engage people in the real deal. You know, it's a fair and transparent value exchange. That's what the whole of the economy has to be based on.
So I guess linked to that, business taking greater social responsibility from government.
Well, I think it's a must. One of the things I'm involved in with business in the community is United Futures, and that whole concept of businesses getting more engaged with the charitable sector to do some more of the heavy lifting.
The notion that we must pursue economic growth as the primary goal of government.
I think that's an entirely good thing. The beauty about wealth redistribution is it starts with the concept of wealth, and then you get on to the redistribution. So if we're creating value add, we can have a high quality debate about how we make sure that's appropriately allocated.
A 100 bet on France beating England tonight, and he doesn't know
it
the
may
result.
it may be too late. As long as I'm just glad I didn't have £100 on Ireland beating Croatia last night.
So I noticed he didn't answer that question. And then finally, to an Arsenal fan, Arsene Wenger gets sacked after 7 trophyless seasons.
Well, Jim clearly isn't an Arsenal fan, but Mr. Wenger will never be sacked, so that would be a bad thing.
Very good. Well, listen, Ronan, thank you for playing the good, bad game.
Thank you.
So I think we're reasonably sticking to our time frame, and we now just go into just a few questions. I've obviously studied the O2 Think Big strategy in detail and have written the report, and so these are sort of a few questions that have come to me as I've been working on it. The big issue for many consumer companies at the moment is how to shift consumer demand towards more sustainable products. So M&S, Unilever, many companies are grappling with this. Some call it the 33 paradox. 30% of consumers call themselves ethical shoppers, but only 3% when it comes to the tills. Do you recognise those figures in your business, and do you see it as part of O2's job to empower the sustainable consumer?
Well, I think I recognise the 33 because Bill actually coined it in a previous life working with the co-op, if I'm not mistaken. So we have the origin of it there from some research he did. I think the world is changing, though. If you take examples like, so with our eco ratings inside our business, I think you probably are on the 33 equation. But if you look at something like fair trade, or you look at recycling, or look at some other things, fair trade coffee is taking double-digit percentages of the market for coffee in retail multiples. Our O2 Recycle business is growing, exponentially. So I think, provided you do things in a way that engages customers, there is an opportunity to significantly shift those numbers. And we're probably more in a 50-20 economy now than maybe a 33.
And what about what you're doing sort of most engages the consumer? Is there anything that actually educates them about sustainability in the process?
I think there's a couple of things. The very fact that the Recycle program is set up in a way that we explicitly use proceeds from it to fund our own sustainability agenda, the fact that we engage people with eco ratings, it means that we're engaging people in saying there's been a cost to it somewhere. In the ICT sector, it's all about, make the IT and what it costs, then use it, and then, applying it. I think what we're trying to do is make sure that people understand those first make and use equations. And I think that, the very fact that in discussion in a retail store, somebody points out the fact that because you've got your sat-nav and your MP3 player on your phone and you're using one integrated device means that you're actually reducing your overall carbon footprint. It's an interesting conversation for people.
And you talked about your phone chargers earlier and how you're planning to phase out phone chargers at the point of sale by 2015. But I also, talking to your team, they explained in your market research, quite a lot of customers have said, we like to have lots of chargers around the house, all plugged in, so that when I'm upstairs I can just plug my phone in, and when I'm downstairs I can plug it in there. And that they might actually resent it if you take away their charger. Would you actually be willing to go against your customer wishes, or how would you deal with that?
I think any business has to be willing to change, but also has to be willing to make sure it brings its customers on the journey with it. So I think the customer insight actually is, if the customer thinks that we're doing it because we're going to save money on the charge and we're being mean, then the answer is they aren't going to adopt. If they understand that actually it's the real deal, we're doing it for their benefit, well then the chances are they will. So what we'll probably have to do in the transition is something simple, like say, here's the best, most efficient charger you've ever had, and we'll happily give it to you for free, but now that you've got the best, you can get rid of the rest. And by the way, we'll take them back on the recycling program.
Many people in the audience here will be wishing that their CEO was as engaged in sustainability as you are. And you've talked to us about how the penny dropped for you at the Xerox conference. But have you got any advice for people in the audience who are wondering how they could engage their CEO. They might have 5 minutes in the elevator. That's a long time in the elevator, but what would you do?
I think the trick is you've got to start with who you are as a business. I talked about the fact that we're a brand who runs a business. This is embedded in who we are. We are dealing with 22 million people. We're dealing with 40% of the young people in the UK. This is a relevant consideration for them. We as a business cannot afford to be silent on this issue. So it's just finding what is the relevance from a business point of view for you with your engagement in your particular customer groups. And the truth is, you'll be a little bit ahead of them on the thinking, but you know what? You'll be able to bring them onto the journey. So just be relevant and be authentic, like any type of leadership.
Mm. And prior to being CEO, you were the CFO of O2. And again, probably
I was also a banker if we want to get all of the bad news out early, you know.
And so I think many people in sustainability feel that the CFO can be the sort of the showstopper, and that their sort of thirst for measurement often causes them to miss employee engagement, brand opportunities around sustainability. Do you think that's fair, that the CFO is the showstopper?
I think it may be a challenge in some organisations. I mean, if I just take our own organisation, you know, we rally around a couple of key things. What is the right thing for the customer? What's the customer insight? The CFO doesn't have a right of veto on customer insight. We may have a debate about what we do with that insight, but doesn't have a right of veto. Ultimately, the CFO is even more keen for the best financial performance for the business. And in my view, honestly, the only sustainable business model is one that engages customers and employees on the stuff that really matters. And if you don't have sustainability on that agenda, you're going to come unstuck at some stage.
What's stopping you from changing your business model faster?
Good question. I think, if I'm honest, I think, and this is not a cop-out, but you know, unilateral and multilateral change. If I use the example of the deal we did announced with Vodafone the other day, we started on that journey in 2009. And the good news is it's been the same CEOs in the two businesses for that time, so we've worked, Guy and myself, together on it. But it's taken us from, you know, grassroots of doing some, yeah, we'll build some new sites together, isn't that good, tick, all the way through to we're going to crash these things. It takes time. Competitive markets, unilateral actions can be difficult. I think as industry groups, we miss out on the multilateral stuff. And things like, for example, us saying with the eco rating, well, others can use it. Let's go to the GSMA, the ITU, and other people and say, look, yeah, maybe we've got a bit of a first mover advantage on it, but wouldn't it be better? I mean, one of the companies who doesn't participate in the eco rating is Apple. And one of the reasons why they don't is because they say, when it's an industry standard, we'll be there, but we can't afford to do the O2 version and the Vodafone version and whatever else. And there's some legitimacy in that position. So I think the thing that would help us to go faster, particularly in the current economic environment, is more multilateral stuff. Understand what cooperation really means and take some risks.
So you mentioned Apple there, and I think Apple's the only manufacturer who hasn't provided the information you need for your eco ratings. And there's a sort of debate, you know, whether one should deselect suppliers who are non-compliant or engage them. Now, obviously, when your supplier is Apple, deselection will be very tricky. But I know, how do you deal with a powerful company who hasn't provided the information?
So it's a really good challenge. It would be naive of me to say to my customers, I tell you what, just because they haven't filled out the form, I'm going to exclude Apple products from my stores. We absolutely engage with them, and I personally have spoken to Tim Cook on a number of occasions and expressed our view about the approach that we were taking. So it's an open dialogue. I think without giving Apple or any supplier a completely clean bill of health, I think since Tim's taken over, you've seen a lot more visibility on their agenda, his visits out to Foxconn and other things. So I think they're definitely, the momentum in that business is good. And if our conversations with the ITU and GSMA go somewhere, maybe there will be an eco rating on an Apple near you soon.
Okay, I've got two more questions, and then we're going to turn to the audience. So please get any questions ready. You have some, as you described, I think, hairy, audacious targets, and I'd really agree that they are. They're some of the most remarkable targets we've looked at. But I mean, how hard are those targets? I mean, are you thinking we have to hit all those targets, or is it a best efforts? Or
So they're bloody hard, and they're designed to be. I suppose two things I would say is we will very, very, ruthlessly measure, and our friends at Forum don't pull their punches. They'll be really honest with us about what we're doing and what we're not doing. What I expect is, like anything else, is that in delivering all of those targets, the mix will be even more successful on some and will be even less than the others. When the guys put the targets together, they didn't know that Vodafone and ourselves were going to stick our two networks together, because it was a highly confidential project. But that's a good example for me of something that says, you know what? Given the challenge of, over 90% of our carbon footprint being from the energy that's used by the network, it's not just about doing things smarter. This is, for me, the whole ICT space about primary, secondary, tertiary. Unless we do different things, we aren't going to make it. So we as a company, and I think the economy overall, has got to embrace it's real systemic change, new ecosystems driven by behaviour. 5 years ago, we would have shot each other on site, Vodafone and ourselves, and wouldn't dreamt of putting a site together. But our customers will get 2/3 of the country at the moment gets indoor coverage on 3G. We've committed that 98% of the country will get it and still have less masts in the country by sharing. That means from a rural-urban divide, from a localization of the economy, from SMEs and startups, real business benefits, real social benefits, but it's a fundamentally different business model. So the truth is, we're going to have some of those to allow us to get across the line. We can't just do it on our own.
Okay, my last question is, you're an optimist, as you describe yourself, and do you look? You're obviously engaged with the problems that we have with unemployed youth, but also environmental ones. But you feel confident that we as society can win?
Actually, I do, but the big challenge is that probably those of us in the suits in this room are the ones that have to let go. Actually, the fundamental behavioural change that we need already happens with the digital native younger generation. We're just a bit too wary about letting go on some of these things. The reality is the ingredients for the solution are absolutely available to us. Now we've got to give people space to make that happen. Really have to. I mean, the work experience and flexible working is a brilliant example for me. We had with our NGOs and others, when we were talking about this other report that we've done in connection with Forum, which is Connect, Collaborate, Change, we were having consultation on that and talking about some early thoughts on the blueprint. And a senior person from Transport for London was involved. And they shared a little anecdote, and for me it epitomises the challenge that we have is, we were talking about our flexible working approach and the trial we were running by closing down the head office in Slough. And she was saying that they were critically having to find ways of people working outside London during the Olympics. But inside their organisation, flexible working isn't seen as a business tool. It's Jim got promoted last week. Next thing you know, he'll be working from home. That's the reality. So it is about the behavioural changes that we have to really, really address. And the best way of doing that is actually letting go, because the natural behaviour of a younger generation will address the collaborative consumption, the different models, much more effectively than we will.
Very good. Well, listen, we now turn to the floor. I might, if you don't mind, go and stand up here just so I can see the audience
Moderate.
A bit better. Have we got anyone who'd like to start us off with a question? There's Jimmy over here.